Today we're talking with James Santagata of Impact EQ and Silicon Edge, two training companies focused on empowering individuals and organizations with the physical, philosophical, and psychological advantages to prevail in every area of business and life. You'll find that James takes a classic business is war approach, and his extensive experience in Japan and training in samurai-related martial arts manifests in the programmable psychology he offers his exclusive clientele. You will definitely benefit from his insights and enjoy our conversation, so without any further delay, let's get started. James Santagata, welcome to Everyday Samurai.
How you doing, Ken?
I am all right. Very glad to have you with us, and I know that you've got a lot of interesting things to talk about for a world that appears to be fairly broken, as you write about on your Impact EQ website. I know that you've got a very diverse and interesting background and that you've developed some products that give people the physical, philosophical, and psychological edge so that they can increase their productivity, performance, and profitability. But before we get into all that, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this business.
Yeah, so I'm currently based in Tokyo. I moved here in 2006. So prior to that, I had worked in Silicon Valley, mostly I worked a little bit in semiconductors, but mostly in software, enterprise, and also in some of the earlier IPTV and e-commerce applications. And one of the things I kind of learned over that was that pretty much everything is psychological, right? So you're dealing with world-class technologies and people, but when you kind of boil it down, all of these problems, all of these misunderstandings, even when people are looking for the same objective, this psychology gets in the way. So rather than being a facilitating factor, making things smoother and having us be more productive, having better lives and so on, it's often the kind of gating item that's stopping that. And then I noticed more and more people were taking, various psychotropics and anti-anxiety, and it's only gotten worse now. And that kind of pushed me in that way to kind of go deep into, what was psychology and what are some of these root causes, and then what solutions could come out that a normal person could use without having to study for years or have to be very technical. And that's kind of where this led me into this idea of, the psychological operating system, a psych suite, so sort of Microsoft Office for your mind, and then various other pieces that are already productized to make that a reality.
So a lot of people spend a lot of time in the monastery developing that Zen attitude or what have you, chanting under a waterfall, but you've developed a different approach. How did you come up with it?
Yeah, so a lot of it was trial and error. So I when I was in high school, we moved around a lot when I was a kid. I had actually during my senior year, I'd come down with these intense panic attacks. No one really knew what they were in those days. And I was like, this is, how is this coming? What's happening? And, then they introduce you through the, psychiatrist, whatever, to CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, which directly is kind of a modern take of stoicism, right? Applied stoicism. And, I went through that. I learned that a lot and it was very helpful. But then over time, I was always wondering where this came from. And you started seeing a lot of issues we also grew up in military towns, around the Marine bases in Southern California. And you look at things like PTSD and so on, and anxiety. And as I began to analyze that and just applying things I knew about statistics and what happened to me and so on, you begin to develop these models. And then it's just a matter of testing them again and again, helping other people try them. And eventually you kind of realize this is a complex model with many different pieces, and many of these have interplays and also loop back on themselves. And I just kept moving down into this idea of the operating system until you can componentize everything and begin to break them down into smaller elements and primitives. And then once you've done that, they should be able to recombine like Lego bricks. So think of taking a kit and breaking it down to individual bricks. Well, they should be able to be reassembled again into some type of application, right? Either for interviewing, relationships, or just generally work with yourself. And each time I kind of felt that I came to the limit, right? Whether it was stoicism and so forth, you find something new, right? You just keep moving it down. And I'd say there's certain ways to get to this. Just some may be more effective. So it'd be no different than programming a computer. You can program using punch cards or tape in the old days. You could program using tape. You can program from the keyboard and so on. So there may be more effective ways to program and to get to this point. But we're all doing it now, whether we know it or not. And that's the thing. Most of it is kind of covert or unconscious. And this idea is to surface and show you, what's impacting your life and programming you down to your neurons without you probably even being aware.
And that leads to something that you've identified as mental malware, which seems to be one of the root causes for such a broken world that we see around us. Tell us a little bit about mental malware.
Yeah, so if we look at malware, this comes out of the concept of software. So probably in its simplest form, software is just a set of instructions or an instruction set that you're telling a particular CPU or processor what to do. In this case, it may be your brain, and so on. And software can come in a few flavors. So it may be the actual application, like accounting or hands-free driving or controlling an elevator. But there's also a broader category as to the effect on the user. And that effect is often with the user being unaware. So there may be something good, like beneficial software, which would be benaware, and that may be your browser is beneficial and so on. Malware is the software that does bad things. So in the paradigm of computers, that would be your ransomware, that may be spyware, these types of things. Within our human system as well, there's malware. So there's two types of malware. Mental malware is your cognitive malware. That will change the way you view things that are made to end up deleterious to you. And at the same time, there's moral malware, since the morality function of the mind also will work and interplay and govern much of the control that you do. These are almost like fail-safe systems that play in. So mental malware is why you end up with even the Overton window. You have very a narrow moral window or cognitive window because certain things are either discarded, distorted, deleted, dropped, or they may be seen to be crazy, ridiculous, evil, and so on. And that's how you can begin to see how this malware impacts so much of what we do.
I want to just take a second to define the Overton window for those that might not know that it's the window of allowable or acceptable opinion, especially when it comes to political discourse.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
So certain things that might not be even considered acceptable, it's moving the Overton window has to occur first before you can make proposals that will get any light of day.
Correct. And I believe that window works for other aspects outside of politics, right? So our decision making, even dating, can I ask, or interviews, can I ask the person that? Can I posture myself this way? There's the allowable behaviors and also the morality of it. And you see this in so many decisions that people make, often to their detriment. For instance, I don't want to do this because this will be prejudicial, and the person ends up dead, right? Maybe you did need to be prejudicial, right? Where you're prejudging, you're using priors to determine that may be an unsafe situation to be in, and vice versa. A malware may be as simple as just assuming that money's dirty, or the root of all evil, or that, I don't want to do sales. Sales, that's a scummy business. Well, many salesmen may be that way, but it doesn't mean that you have to operate in that way or that the profession itself is bad. So there's a lot of these issues that are put in there. And malware would be that if it was something that harms you, right? That harms your decision making and so forth, that then leads you to conclusions or to an outcome that's detrimental to you.
That makes a good point, and I'll just illustrate another opportunity to talk about the Overton window. That there was a time where I was an adult, I was making money, I was free to make my own choices and take vacations as I chose, but I never thought about going to Japan, even though I was interested in martial arts and Japanese culture all my life. It wasn't until someone suggested it to me, and it was like, oh, I guess I can do that. And so there's so many opportunities that perhaps we don't pursue because we don't even consider them within the range of possibility.
Yes.
And that is another illustration of overcoming that mental malware that keeps us limited.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And so much of this, it happens when we're young, right? So we're programmed. We're all programmed, right? We have to be over time. And this is not necessarily a defect of human evolution or the brain. We're going to learn through various ways. One of them is mimicry, repetition, and so forth. But over time, we don't even realize that we've been programmed. This is why you'll see young kids, if you've been around them before they go to school, they're very quirky. In fact, you'll find almost all the kids your kids may play with have unbelievably different quirks. But as they go through school and they, quote, mature, these quirks all begin to go away and all the behavior begins to move within the norm, like a normal distribution. That's not because they're growing up. That's because they're being programmed and so-called socialized, which is social programming, towards that mean. Now, obviously, we need some level of focal points or shelling point where the behavior begins to, aggregate or congregate around some mean to, in terms of hygiene and so forth. But the point is, so much of that is actually programmed into the child before they even know it. The problem is, once it's programmed at that level and it goes into the neurons, this is when you end up with dissonance, right? The so-called cognitive dissonance. But what I found over time and through the research is that cognitive dissonance is only one aspect. That's, thinking dissonance. So maybe an idea that you have or something you see doesn't match up with your expectations, right? But the issue is, a lot of this is coming from the neurons, or what I call neural dissonance. You're not even aware why, but you've been programmed and now it becomes difficult. So this basal state of the neurons become your comfort zone. And this is why people say, well, I just can't do that. Well, the reason you can't do it is not because that's who you are. It's because that's the way you're programmed, right? That's the way you've been programmed. So you can change that programming. And we know this goes on all the time. A perfect example would be within the military, right? Different guys come in and then a certain product comes out. So you'll find a guy who may have been adverse to authority and so on, and would feel, or even the guy feels weird saluting superior, and then by the time they're out, if you took them back to civilian life and said, hey, don't call me sir or stop saluting, that same guy that told you that he felt uncomfortable calling people sir and saluting will now change and say, I feel uncomfortable not calling you sir, right? Because now they've been programmed the opposite way.
It's interesting. I'll add an anecdote to that. Having been through the military for some 30 odd years, I actually feel strange putting my hands in my pockets.
Yes.
Because we're so conditioned and disciplined to avoid, why are you putting your hands in your pockets? You have gloves for that, or, just suck it up, buttercup. So it really is down at the deepest level. I'm not thinking about it, but as soon as I do it, I feel off. I feel like something's wrong.
Yeah. And I also would say, I'm not considering that malware. So even within like a learning institution, I have three levels. So the worst level, of course, is a death camp, right? You're going to die. There's nothing for you there. Die in a salt mine. The next level may be a work camp. So maybe you're working something off. It might be reciprocal, it may not be, but that's part of it. And then there's a boot camp. So boot camp is actually, or should be, beneficial, because the idea is you're going to get your mission done. You're going to get the outcome. They don't want you to die. That's training you for a mission. But, the people are getting the same programming, and then it becomes there. You see it in paramilitary organizations too. So the police, you'll see this in fire departments as well. Also, you'll see it within airline pilots. And the reason is you have to have a very small standard deviation of this behavior, because people just doing what they want to do, and these things could get people killed, right? Not only could you lose battles, but a lot of other bad things can happen even in training and plane crashes and so forth. But it just shows you that we can be changed, that we can change. But it takes a lot of effort to do so, to reprogram and reset these neurons into new pathways that then become the new basal state, or the base state, that just is what we're using within our daily interactions and such.
And would you submit or suggest that the world that we're experiencing now and the way that we perceive it and our ability to change or make positive change has been conditioned through this mental malware, so that rather than having the healthy, centered, and harmoniously productive world that we were promised, we're getting a very confused, stressed, and burned out situation?
Yeah, and I think, the way they'll do this, you'll see this, and not to get political, but just to show how that dissonance works. If you look at a lot of the crime rate and the standard of living within San Francisco, for years they were targeting tourists, right? The record number of break-ins of rental cars and so forth. But as the pandemic came, and also word got out to kind of stay away, more and more of the tourists, which were the easy pickings, stayed away. So now as the crime rate continues, it's just going to move and begin to eat what's ever there, which is the locals. And you saw this with shoplifting, guys walking out with bags of goods, which then ended up with other knock-on effects, like having to lock up toothpaste and hair products and reduced hours and so forth. And I've seen people interviewed, and a lot of them may be much more on the, I hate the word left and right, but on the left side of politics. And they're like, someone needs to do something. Why can't they do it? And then if you turn it around and say, well, what you were asking for you were given, they'll immediately blame someone else. Oh, this was even Reagan, right? This was Reagan from the 80s or Trump or whoever, because the dissonance cannot let them believe that what they had believed was because a lot of this is moral programming, right? That's even stronger than mental. The moral outrage programming. Now they have dissonance that that's not matching the way it was supposed to end up with the world. And instead they have a collision of what they're expecting to see versus the reality. And this is how you can turn people on themselves. And this is why so much of this leads to these psychotropic drugs, because people are not updating their worldview to the way the world is. They're shocked and they're broken. In fact, this is what you'll see within the military, right? There's for combat vets, you see two things. Mostly they talk about PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress syndrome. Well, PTSD is really a processing issue, most likely. So things like anxiety. And, if you look at the mind, our mind functions using like Bayesian inference. So it looks at certain patterns and then it will look at probabilities and begin to process them. So what happens is you might be in combat, and obviously there's, explosions, gunfire around you and so on. And pretty soon you begin to associate those possibilities at a much higher level. This is why if you ever see something, well, you see this many times, less so now as shootings become more prevalent in the US, but there might be shootings going on. They always interview some guy that goes, I thought it was a movie. I thought it was firecrackers. The reason they say that is, under the availability heuristic, the only choices they're used to making in that small Overton window is a movie, fireworks, and so on. They can't believe someone's gunning people down at the movie theater, right? But that same combat vet may be walking on a sunny day, hear a car backfire, and hit the ground. And the reason is, in his mind, there's smaller options about making a movie and firecrackers. That loud noise could be something coming his way, and he knows to hit the deck. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but these are all programming and how these algorithms affect everything that we do. And they're all reprogrammable. That's the best thing about it. But there's different aspects that need to be touched upon for these as well.
You bring up a great point with the processing of a combat vet. When they see a traumatic incident or a critical incident unfold, they have incorporated the psychological capacity to understand and respond, whereas the average citizen can't even comprehend of what's going on. And they don't have the faculty to deal with the situation because they haven't trained for it and they haven't processed it. They haven't internalized the psychological processing capability. And I think a lot of people are also shocked. You brought up San Francisco, which is an excellent illustration of socialism gone wrong. We talk about political economy on the show, and so therefore, yeah, we do understand that socialism is a construct and the results are manifesting all around us, especially when it comes to crime and justice and security. And San Francisco is a great illustration because there you have an administration that has deliberately stated that they're not going to prosecute shoplifting. And of course, the result is you get more shoplifting. But you brought up an excellent point earlier about, they chased away the tourists, so the criminal element is focusing inward at locals, and, well, the administration has given them free rein. So again, that's another excellent point of showing how all the things that we were promised that government provides for security and justice, well, that doesn't work anymore. We're seeing that unfold. We see it more and more. And when we talk about the difference between a combat vet and the opportunities that you describe on your Impact EQ website, the psychological superpower that you're programming people for gives them the opportunity to create new ways of being and to thrive in this world that appears to be so crazy. But you say that business is the real battlefield. Why is that?
So one of my thesis is that business is the battlefield, and there's a few reasons why. So if you look at even the modern world, the direct violence may feel good or appear to work, but what happens when you actually win? If there's not the ability to conduct business and build a society, you're going to fall right back into the same clutches or the same patterns of those that can do it. And we could see this in Afghanistan as well, right? The country needs to be viable and so forth. If you go back to earlier times and look at some of these patterns or prototypes, one of my favorite would be the Hanseatic League in the 1300s, right? So there you're dealing in within Germany and the Baltic states, this idea that this is more of in my opinion, a bottoms up model. So you start with the idea that rather than a union, and we can go into the differences of union versus a guild, you have a guild. In the guild, the Hansa or Hanse, even today we see remnants of that with companies such as the German carrier Lufthansa, the Air Guild. You're giving direct benefits back to the community and the workers, and then over time they begin to federate with other guilds, and you end up with private navies and militaries and so forth managing this, and they become extremely successful. So when you have a business, what you can do is you can begin to, because I believe that if you look at a lot of these, even if you look at the East Indies Company and the prior version of that, where the British copied the Dutch, when I think in the 1600s, you'll see that militaries follow business. So business interests are trading, and then military interests follow those, whether they're private armies or the nation state. And then with the military comes other issues of languages and more culture and foods and so forth. And it's a push-pull. It goes both ways. So you'll see, the British in India, you'll see certain British customs and things which then change India, right? Such as banning the idea of ritual burning of a deceased man's wife alive, right? Sati, English is introduced. On the other hand, look at how popular certain Indian dishes are within the UK, right? And you same thing, right? Coming at words with other religions and spiritual or religious thoughts. So business has the ability to make these changes. So for instance, if you look at, let's say, a mask mandate, whether you believe in it or not, if the stores say, hey, you can't come in, well, then if I open up the same store and say you can, I can actually impose my will by removing that pincer that they have to make you do it. If someone says you can't work here if you're not vaxxed, and I say I don't care, I can then open up and relieve that. So by having business as a battlefield, you're understanding that just like in war, everyone's involved. You have commanders, generals, you have battleships. These can be businesses, entrepreneurs. You've got foot soldiers, that may be someone who's working. It could be a seamstress. And your ammunition is going to be also the dollars that you have. So even an individual has power, right? We know, even in traditional economics, casting your dollar votes, preventing your dollar votes, word of mouth, using word of mouth, leaving certain reviews of something you like or dislike and so on, Glassdoor, Yelp, only working for companies you like. But right now, because it's such a series of monopolies or oligopolies, as well as a lot of collusion. I don't like the word conspiracy. I prefer the term collusion. And there's no doubt that collusion exists. We've seen so many examples in recent years, including hiring in Silicon Valley of certain people controlling wages and blacklists and things of that nature. So if we focus on business, then suddenly we have a lot more power. You're supporting the companies you like, you have opportunities to work and so forth. And it makes for a much more resilient kind of ecosystem as well. And I think that's one of the reasons we've lost our way, is everyone thought, oh, I'm just going to go buy a gun. I'm just going to buy an AR. I'm going to do this. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a big proponent of self-defense and these, but just like there's a continuum of lethal and non-lethal weapons, the same thing happens here as well. If you can build the businesses, then you never really get to that point. If you can begin to build the products, then you don't have to worry about deplatforming in these various pieces, right? You'll notice this. How does business work? Great example. On the one hand, you'll see Google and so many other of these powerful tech companies deplatform they don't like. But how does that work when they're in China? Well, when they're in China, China deplatforms them. So Google was deplatformed out of the entire country. It doesn't even exist in China. They were thrown out. And it's kind of hilarious. They'll complain about that, but deplatform you. So it goes both ways. And I think that most people don't want to be violent. And of course, there's time and place for all this. And there's certain things that are hanging over your head, right? Whether you'll be caged or fined and so forth. But we're in a world where understanding the psychology, that way you're removing the malware from yourself and being more effective and able to punch above your weight, and then seeing that this can be force multiplier. can be used with business and technology, you have a chance to influence many others. Great example is look at Netflix. If you look at Netflix, they're making billions of dollars every year, huge market cap. I mean, Facebook is $1 trillion market cap. I think Google's around there. Google's doing 32 billion a quarter, and so on. Netflix has, I forget what I read, 100 billion revenue or something. It's huge amounts, influencing 100 million people. And you're literally being programmed, right? They've got it down to a science of how they program you, but they're not doing it as a one-off. It's an ongoing business. And in that business, you're actually you're paying them, right? You are paying them for the pleasure, and you enjoy it. Take my money to have you programmed of how you act, how you relate. Great example. Look at some of these movies. Most of the horror movies of the 1980s and since are very nihilistic, right? Freddy Krueger and these. There's no defense. He can even kill you in your sleep, right? Even don't close your eyes, you'll die. If you look at previous horror movies, and I think one of them was The Thing, or The Thing from Outer Space. It's like 1950s. I don't remember where it was, but it was taking place in the Arctic or something, at one of the Army research bases. And the guy runs in and he says, "Oh my God, there's some creature out there." All these guys drop their cards, they're playing cards, grab the M1 Garand, open the door, and just start firing at that object in the distance, right? So the programming was much more agential. By having business, you have the ability. Now you're still going to need the same food that you eat, but you can pick the ones that benefit you. You can pick these businesses. And so I think that's what we've lost. We've lost this ability to understand that this is a critical part of our society.
All right, let's take a break so I can share a new tool I'm using in my daily routine. I'm ditching the disposable cartridge razors. I've had enough of those multi-blade monstrosities. It was long past time to find something more in line with my principles. And training in a samurai-related martial art, a razor that emulated the beauty and function of the single-edged katana, wakizashi, tanto, or kaiken. Even when the samurai trained with or carried two swords, most of them used one blade at a time in combat. Miyamoto Musashi was famous for using the long and short swords simultaneously, but he was a rare exception, and he wrote in the Gorin no Sho that anything done in contravention of training cannot be considered the true way. So, now I'm focusing on the single blade technique to elevate my grooming standards, and you can too with one blade shave. That's right, one blade shave. No more messing with these extra blades that do nothing but scrape extra skin from your face. One blade shave. This is the way of a cleaner look and healthier skin. It's also a way to build skill in blade handling with every shave. No more short, choppy strokes. Have you ever counted how many strokes it takes to shave your face? Maybe it's time to drive toward greater efficiency. The way of the one blade shave is lather twice, cut thrice. Downward cut, lateral, or sideways cut, and finally, the upward cut. Every shave becomes a skill-building exercise to see how clean can I make my face without resorting to those short, inefficient pulls. I'll tell you what, after 30 days of practice, I couldn't be any happier. My skin is better, my face is smoother, and I feel like every morning I've accomplished something terrific. It takes practice, of course, and a bit of getting used to. That is also part of the adventure in owning and using a relentlessly engineered precision tool to bring about the best shaving experience of your life. The one blade is designed in pursuit of excellence, just like the legendary katana of the samurai. And now every shave can be like doing tameshigiri test cutting in search of the most perfectly efficient cut. No more cutting the underside of your nose with those ridiculous edge trimmers on the overpriced cartridges. No more wrecking your skin with all those extra blades. It's time to adopt a new approach to shaving, and for you to work with the very best tools for the job. You deserve the best. Now it's time to own the best. Your one-blade razor is made in America and uses the sharpest and most reliable Japanese stainless steel blades in the world. Go to everydaysamurai.life/oneblade to level up your shaving experience. That's everydaysamurai.life/oneblade, and that's one word. Remember, taking pride in your appearance with a close shave and smooth skin is one of the best ways to elevate your mood and self-esteem. Working with beautiful yet functional equipment is another, just like a katana or a custom pistol. Get the best and be your best. Go to everydaysamurai.life/oneblade. That's everydaysamurai.life/oneblade. All right. We now return to our regularly scheduled program in progress. It's interesting that we talk about the field of political economy and we put the politics first, but in a Lockean, John Locke's framework, property rights arise prior to the formation of the state. And law is there to protect the rights of property that pre-exist the formation of government. So I think you're onto something with that. And what I appreciate about that is that you're looking to weaponize psychology so that individuals and organizations can bust through that mental malware. So tell us about how we weaponize psychology.
Right. So if we look at, even kind of go back and look at, what is what's a weapon? So I'll define a weapon as a tool. It's a tool. So a tool that can kill, maim, or harm, or stop people and break and damage things. Now, again, there's different levels of what you would do. But the idea is, if you look at even a normal tool, say a farm implement, as you talk about martial arts, on the one hand, you can apply different techniques to what already exists. So you'll take the rice flail, you have nunchakus. Take the rice planter, you've got a sai or jute. Take the mill handle for grinding the grains, you've got tonfa. Take the poles that carry the water pails, and you've got your rokushakubo or bow stick. So there you're using existing tools and you're improvising by using other techniques. That's a weapon. On the other hand, you can take other things that exist that aren't weaponized, fire, extreme rapid oxidation, and you can turn that into Greek fire, flamethrowers, hand grenades, and so on. The difference is the first one is it takes a lot more skill to use nunchakus or a sai or a tonfa than it does the other way, to use a handgun or a grenade. Those are productized, and they've already figured out the physics, the chemistry, the metallurgy, material science, the optics, and so on. You just pull the pin and throw in the direction of enemy, or point, sight, squeeze. And that's the idea of the weaponized psychology, is that by understanding, again, it's not just weaponized. Weaponized would be the more extreme version. Again, if you need it, it's there. So you'll understand when you should talk, when you don't talk. If you say this, what will they do? So there's some very simple but powerful models that show you the way that people act and react almost universally, that you can then begin to control. Sometimes you want to trigger them, other times you want to avoid it. The wider thing of this weaponization, though, which is in all of this training, is my concept and the technology, what I call programmable psychology. So beyond simply looking at persuasion or influence or compliance, you can look at this as a complete programming language. And just like in programming, you'd put it along a timeline. Same thing. You can then begin to program people how you want them to act or react as well. And this gives you that power. So what's a great example? One of my other businesses, we go on site, you're dealing with different teams, people where there's a lot of different personalities. In many of the cases, they're bringing you into a company that needs a lot of help to turn around, and you're an outsider. So using these programmable psychology techniques, you can quickly understand and characterize the people around you. It's no different than you'd see in, say, the military or other transportation of radar or sonar. And once you know that, you can then understand how the people are going to react, and literally use some very simple programming to hopefully have them understand and to work with you towards the common goal that you were brought in to do, or in other cases to even self-eject as well. So it's very powerful.
And the way that you teach is using applied psychology. Obviously, there's scientific background to that, and it's anchored in economics and then aligned with cosmic law. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if you go further down, so first off, most people think of psychology as either some sort of quackery or kind of a talk therapy. So I call it talk, tissues, tears, and Thorazine.
Thorazine?
Thorazine, or any of the psychotropics, anti-anxiety. So it could be Prozac, Zoloft, Xanax, Ambien, dozens of more today. But that's kind of the model, right, that people think of. But if I look at psychology, I use it as a much broader term. So this is going to be the study of the mind, behavior, feelings, actions. They can be unconscious or conscious. Now, some would argue that would be unscientific, and that's why then within these fields you begin to see the emergence of cognitive science and neuroscience. So my view of psychology includes cognitive science, which is going to be the interplay of processes and decision making, and also neuroscience, that's going to look at the study of brain structures, nervous system, neural circuits. And all of these are going to pull from many different fields: linguistics, computer science, cytology, like the cellular level, biology, and so forth. So the idea is, how can you take all of this information that normally sits with independent research and begin to make sense of them and put them together? So many of these are already backed by science. I mean, scientific studies are done in psychology. So if you want to look at cognitive dissonance, or we want to look at certain types of neuromorality and where it might sit in certain functional areas of the brain and so forth. But the idea is, are those replicable? And what happens when you stack them together? So on the one hand, you can say that this particular gun works great, or this barrel or howitzer, but how does it work at altitude in North Korea in the winter, right? When you look at the Korean War, they had a lot of issues with, well, luckily with the M1 Garand, it had enough kick that it would be fine, but some of the lower powered weapons, you lose a lot of barrel pressure under those conditions and so forth. So the idea is stacking these together, and then I take what I've begin to use and then test these again. So using empirics and then other things that I might test. So there's a scientific method. And again, what is science? Depends on how you define it. But the idea of, let's say, well, first off, it comes from Latin for knowledge. So a systematic method of building or challenging, categorizing and organizing that information, ideally with some sort of testable hypothesis. But even with that, we run into the issue of, Thomas Kuhn and his book, Revolutions of Science, right? What happens when there's a paradigm shift? How do we know, right? If you define a crow, I think he talks about crows. If you define a crow as having, black color and this particular, these phenotypes and these structures and so forth, when you come across that same bird that's white, is that still a crow, a white crow, or is that a different paradigm? What I'm doing with all of this is constantly testing. And also there's a lot of things I'd expose as not true. For instance, you might have heard of that Stanford marshmallow test. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, but I'm sure the listeners would like to get a bit of a background and a refresher on it.
Yeah, so the marshmallow test was the idea, some people call it candy bar test, purporting to show the ability to maintain discipline or to control your time preference. So the idea is you bring in young kids and you'll tell them that there's going to be a certain candy bar or marshmallow that you can get now, or locked away in this drawer, there's a second one just like this. And if you can wait for 30 minutes or an hour, you could have both, right? And the idea is that we can look and see if the children can actually have the ability to maintain or control their desire to have that sweet snack right now. The idea is that over time, we can do a longitudinal study, and the kids that actually control their visceral needs might do better in life. But actually, when I first read that test in 2006, I immediately had a lot of questions. That test doesn't seem to me that it's actually even structured properly. Since then, they've done some other ones, I think, in the West Indies that were kind of along the way I was thinking. But the idea is, what if you don't like candy bars? Now you're not even testing the ability of discipline. You need to first make sure they like candy. Otherwise, it's not even the ability of testing discipline or time preference. The other thing is, even if the guy likes the candy bar, there's a satisficer, and one's enough. They don't need to wait 30 minutes for the second one. But then for other kids, for me, I was more of a paranoid kid. There's the issue of warranty and trust. How do I know you're not punking me? How do I know that by waiting, you're going to give me and follow through? If the candy bar is in escrow, now kids are not going to be able to articulate that, but a lot of kids are smart, think that way.
Sure. A bird in the hand is better than two in the bush.
Exactly. And so many times we find these tests are not structured properly. We see this with the Milgram test over, control and pain and many other ones which are coming to light. Also, there's a big database out there. I've kept a lot myself, where you find people that have actually been very prominent, where the data is outright fraudulent, right? Actually fake data, and the people have been discredited. So there's an issue, again, of replicating science and so forth.
But I think the larger point then is that you need to have personal discipline. I think that's what the marshmallow test was supposed to show, is that
Correct.
The low time preference, meaning you don't need to be satisfied immediately. You're willing to put in the time to work towards the solution and the goals that you really want in the larger picture, rather than going after immediate satisfaction. I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially martial artists, because you have to stretch every day. You have to do your suburi. You have to do your basic practices in order to get really good and skillful and use, or even be able to comprehend the higher level techniques. And that also applies to business. You have to have savings that then can be used for investment, to invest in higher quality equipment and become more productive that way. I think the lesson there is
correct. Yes. Yeah.
Valid, even though the test might not have proven it so because of its structural problems that you've identified. But I think that For you, as somebody who's trying to take this psychology and apply it for being able to be successful in a world that is trying to keep you small or trying to keep you off balance, I think that you need to find the hack, and maybe that's what your programs are offering.
Correct. Yeah. And so I think for me, the final holy grail of all this is, rather than saying this worked or didn't work, it really comes down to the predictive models. So if your model works and it continues to predict, to me, that's much better than having a bunch of independent tests that are supposedly science-backed and so forth. The ultimate science to me is actually having something where it's a predictive model. The closer it is to predicting the reality, then to me, the more valid that test is. And this is why you see so many of these things that may work independently and are science-backed. They were using the scientific method, hypothesis testing, and so forth, but they'll often fail. And that's because when you begin to chain these together, like I'm doing in a programming language, these things begin to interact, right? So just like oil and water may be scientifically tested of having certain viscosity or certain properties, you put them together. On the other hand, there's emergent properties that may not be known. So emergence would be where two things that have independent characteristics may then show, when they're combined or combined naturally, create something new. And that would be like oxygen and hydrogen. When they get together, now you have something new that's emergent, which would be water. And this is, I think, where a lot of these happen. On the one hand, you're testing things in a very small elemental area, but what happens when they're actually combined together and when they apply? So I approached all of psychology not from a idea of trying to understand things at small pieces, but in problem solving. Let's try this. Okay, why did that fail? So it'd be like working on your car in the old, or the, muscle cars. I want more power. Okay, what can I do to get more power? I can, number of things. Even with the existing engine, I might use higher compression pistons. Okay, great, but what does that do? Well, when I have higher compression, I may now need a better level of gasoline that has higher octane to prevent pre-ignition or knocking. On the same time, when I produce more power, now I end up with more heat. And you run into this whack-a-mole problem of then, getting out the gassing and the exhaust. But the real goal is more power that's moved to the pavement, right? That's where you're looking at it. And I think complex system, and that's with psychology. You can tell someone, never beg for forgiveness. That's one of the models of my system. Actually, never even ask for permission. But that can also then, and it does, create other problems where if you don't understand what's going to happen, you get people then that become tone deaf. So if you never ask for permission, that means you also end up with people that are not thinking clearly, and they're missing a lot of the feedback and signals that are coming from society around them. So there's the idea of the internal compass and the internal engine that's driving you forward, but also having the ability to take in that information and recalibrate as you go through. And most things in society we've been trained, it's the one pill solution, right? Take this and lose weight. Take this and you'll, won't have ED anymore. Or take this drug, which is your psychotropic, anxiety goes away, but so do your erections. But that's okay. Take this other drug over here, like Viagra, and you'll get your, erection back. And you're looking at all these one-point things that then become with knock-on effects, right? And affect many other aspects of what we do. And I think that's because the actual premise is broken. And it's also, if you know the term accretive, it's just layers and layers on it. Whereas I didn't come out of this industry. I came with a blank sheet of paper. And this goes back to, if you're familiar with Peter Drucker within, business management and, his views, he had one really critical question. So if you look at physics, and Elon Musk talks about this a lot, there's first principles. Let's go back to first principles of science to figure this out. Well, Peter Drucker had a great one too that relates to management, culture, and the approach to anything in life. And he called it the naive question. If we were starting today and had no history, no systems developed, nothing, would we still use the same approach or be doing this today? In most cases, the answer is absolutely not. Same for education. We would not be doing it this way if we were to approach it today.
That's an excellent point. And there's a book that comes out of military circles by Peter Blaber called The Mission, the Men, and Me. He's a former Delta Force guy, one of the first guys on the ground in Afghanistan. And one of the principles that he talks about is to always ask, how would we organize if we weren't told how? It plays right into the Drucker theorem.
Yes.
And that also brings back to Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Ask a very simple question. Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
What is this all about? And it seems to me that the politically correct prescriptions, as you indicate, the tissues, the tears, the therapy, and the Thorazine, that all creates further dependency.
Yes.
Makes people dependent upon external actors, whereas the psychology is something that you can focus on within, and that then translates into effects in business, in life, in relationships, in your physical fitness, and your overall outlook in life.
Yes.
So I want to really focus in on your Psyche Combat course that you've got coming up, and tell us a little bit about that, because it seems like a pretty big promise to offer a happy, productive, and friction-free life given the circumstances that we're facing now. So tell us about that Psyche Combat course.
Each one of these courses are based on what I've developed called the Psych operating system. So the Psych operating system allows you to figure out how you operate and the operating system of those around us. The great thing is, it could be negative as well, is that most people around us, there's only a couple flavors of operating systems today. So you can understand the way people think very quickly. And then through there, you have different levels. So the idea of combat is, one of the biggest problems today is that most people are very non-agential. They don't have agency. And I believe this comes from so much of the training and the programming. People are seeking validation. They're looking for permission, or they're begging for forgiveness, and so on. And you can see this in everywhere they talk about it. And, what's a great example? I'm going to die for my country. Not me. I'll kill for my country, but I don't plan on dying for it. You let these guys come and take my guns, right? Come and take them. As opposed to, you can try to take them, but I'm going to stack you like cordwood. So this idea of what is happening, you can see this even subtly in the way people view things. Or if you had two people in Japan that were going into an elevator car and the person held the door, most likely the Japanese person would say sumimasen, which would be excuse me for troubling you or taking your time. The American who spoke Japanese would probably say domo or arigato, thank you. Thank you for holding the door, right? So are you looking at this inward or outward? And most of the things that happen are that we've been trained to literally be farm animals, right? Human husbandry. So we're looking for permission. We're looking that this is okay. We have very limited ability to take control and architect what we want. Many of us have internalized stoicism. So I look at stoicism, one of the memes that I made and used for a long time. And again, stoicism, very powerful. We want to have resiliency. We need that. And that would look like, the famous Buddhist monk who's burned himself alive, self-immolating during the Vietnam War, right? Sitting there on fire. So that's resiliency. We need that. That's a grounded piece. But we also need the ability to architect and execute our plans. And, if you look at some of the futurists, he's passed now, but Alvin Toffler, he said that effectively, if you don't have a strategy of your own, you're simply the part of someone else's strategy. And that's the way most people live their lives.
Isn't that so true now with companies like Google, where if you're not paying, you're not the customer, you're the product.
And being in the product, you're also part of their strategy. So once you're the product, they decide how much they want to sell, what they want to get you to do, and so on. So the premise of Psych Combat is that by, one, we're going to weaponize ourselves and have the tools that we need to get what we want. How do we do? And I call these life nodes, but life includes things like career, your job, your wife or spouse, your kids, neighbors, coworkers, the police, court systems, all of these things. Once we understand the way the world's actually operating, and this is why I don't necessarily subscribe to a blue pill, red pill view. So Psych Combat looks at the world beyond blue and red pill. Red pill is the way the world is, seeing it with clear eyes. The blue pill may be not understanding what's happening or purposely trying to not view the world as it is. I look at it differently. I look at the red pill as telling you what's happening, and then Psych Combat's built a model so that we can predict it. See, the red pill requires a lot of knowledge or empirics of each thing that we apply it to. But if we've got a model of human behavior, we can expect what's going to happen, right? This is why people say, oh, I've lost faith in humanity, or this is sad or crazy. Not my model. My model says, wow, thank God they act that way. Otherwise, I'd have to build a new model. So it's pretty accurate in predicting. And why I've said for years, people aren't going to just use their gun and storm the Capitol. Look at, even if you look at January 6th, however you define that as a protest or not, you didn't see any guns there because they're not going to do it. And if you understand the models, it'll explain why they won't. And then the next step is, how can you move yourself into this idea of always architecting the outcome that you want? See, most people only know how to defend themselves psychologically and at a very limited level at that as well, right? They're always looking for a job, looking for a paycheck. Psych Combat teaches you how to add value. How do you, describe what you have and so forth. And then you also have the ability to punch, right? So if someone told you, listen, I don't like that, you're going to get fired and I'm going to blacklist you, what do? Psych Combat says, that's fine, you can do that. And I'm assuming you're not mad at me, or maybe you are, I don't care. This is what I'm going to do to you. I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to take your job. I'm going to take your reputation. And I think I'm going to take your marriage as well. And I'm going to do it all psychologically. Tell you, when that happens, immediately it shifts. And the guy will say through the model, what are you, crazy? Are you mad? I'm not mad, man. It's just business. Just like you're not mad at me, I don't think. I can come down. We can exchange gunfire. We can, bomb the village. And I'll be back with my family on Sunday for a barbecue. It's nothing personal. It's just business. Now you have respect. Now you're at a whole different level. And you're always going to get much more by having this ability to have combat. That said, Psych Combat is not about, just nuking everyone and bombing everything. The combat may be using silence. It may be not triggering, not breaking the harmony or the wall, keeping a small psychological footprint or psychological wake. And sometimes you want it to be big. Other cases you don't. So it's not just gratuitously battling someone. It may just be very small things here or there. Great example. If you've got a meeting and it looks like one of these ambush meetings at work, and the guy, it's going to be something about performance, and maybe it's even a lie. And the manager says, how you doing? Well, the reason he's saying that is two reasons. He's doing it to see how you are, gauging your behavior and your reaction to him, and ideally hoping that you're going to say, I'm doing great, Tony. And then he's going to lay everything on you, and you're going to be locked in because of the consistency model. And what, you're not going to shift to tell him that something's wrong or whatever? No. But if you have Psych Combat, as soon as he says that, what's going on. You're going to say, I don't know, Tony. It really depends on how this meeting goes.
You're talking about calibrating and perfecting your offensive game, as you describe here, and then...
Yes, and knowing exactly what to say and knowing what his next move is going to be, right? And you have your choice to play him out and let him play the game. We have things called cascades and carousels, or we can stop him at any second. We can turn it around. We can befuddle him. It's knowing exactly what that person is going to do and what we want them to do. Now, doesn't work in every step, but that's fine. He's on a timeline. We then have calibration tools to move him back. But again, we're not going to be sitting there where it's just a beat down and the person's fired or lost or taken over for the promotion, or there's some kind of defamation at work, because that's the way it works. And also, you're going to avoid a lot of problems. Again, home life, people apply this. And these same things are just in the other courses as well, like lovers clash and so on. Turn your marriage around immediately. If you've already divorced, fix the post-divorce type of situation and learn how to control these people. But you're going to do it in a way, sure, sometimes there's knockdown drag-outs and you don't want the person in your life. But like you're saying with Aikido and these other things, simply a little wrist lock or a little hip throw or whatever is going to change everything. That little nudge is going to change things. And the idea is you've got the combat skill, but just like in the military, that you don't want to see these, giant battles. You're trying to get the advantage and win surgically and in other areas.
Well, that's straight up Sun Tzu, The Art of War.
Art of War, exactly.
The highest skill is to not do battle at all.
Yeah, correct.
And so this Psych Combat course is dealing with how to first detect, then deflect, and if necessary, diffuse, disarm, or destroy without looking like the bad guy. In fact, you try to disarm or destroy the aggressor while looking like the nice guy.
Correct, yeah. And I'll give you an example. Look, I've done recruiting as well, and at the high-end talent acquisition side called RPO, Recruitment Process Outsourcing. This is where you manage the entire acquisition for the corporation. Right? So there can be hundreds of jobs, 30, 40, 50 different stakeholders, hiring managers. So I've seen this at scale. Let's say that you're at work and you're dealing with office politics. So many people think, oh, I'll just get a new job. Every time you get a job, you have additional risk. You've got career wounds. You could look job hoppy. You could miss other upward promotional paths. And there's always the risk that that new environment, because the issue is always people, could be even worse than where you're leaving. So why should you have to leave when you have the ability with Psych Combat to understand how people are thinking about you immediately? And again, some of these are through active interrogation. Other ones are forensic tests that I have that you just set, and it's just like checking a trap, like you check for malaria mosquitoes or dengue or West Nile virus in Florida. Same thing. These tests have already been built. Other tests let you run them in your head. And you can run these in your head before it happens, after it happened, and you'll always get the correct answer.
And you've got step-by-step procedures for people to follow here?
Yep. So one example I'll give you right now. It sounds very simple, but Swedish blonde test. Imagine that you were calling a particular client or manager and you had a meeting and you know it's critical. He knows it's critical, but he won't meet with you. What's going on? Well, the Swedish blonde test is simple. If you were a hot Swedish blonde girl and you had no value to offer him other than being a hot Swedish blonde girl, I guarantee he would have time for you to meet. So therefore, it's something else. He has time. He's not allocating it. You know that. So you cannot lie to yourself that he's busy or whatever. There's issues. Maybe that he's setting you up for the fall. It may be that he still doesn't think it's that important. But if it is important at the end, he's going to blame it on you. So these tasks make it where you cannot lie to yourself. So Psych Combat, just like the other courses, removes all of the deception, self-deception of yourself, deception of people deceiving you, people who are deceiving themselves and then deceiving you. And then you understand exactly how to act and what the various outcomes will be. It's a very clear methodology when you should act or not. So all of these are kind of baked into that.
And that's just one example of a tool that you'll gain from this Psych Combat course.
Correct, yeah.
Give us a couple other names without going into the details or spilling too many secrets, but what other types of tests and checklists are available when you go through this course?
Yeah. So all of your psych deception to understand how other people are thinking. Other things include what I call a carousel of choice or answer array. So you'll know exactly what people are going to do before they do it. Then you'll know when you can step in or not. Another example is this also introduces the programmable psyche. So again, you're going to be able to use all these pieces. If you don't want someone around you, you can make them eject. At the same time, you'll know how to control them. Another example is mind blindness. You can make people do things like the Jedi mind trick where they don't even know that you had sent them, for instance, emails. Okay, so you can use this to punch far above your weight and be congruent, not feel bad about it, and win in these environments. Psych Combat would be the same thing if you're dealing with a job interview. Most people go in very mousy, but Psych Combat's the other side when you need to be a bit more aggressive, and it shows you how to calibrate. So what do you say to someone that says you're too weak or too quiet or not qualified? The combat shows you exactly how to get in there and do some grappling and make them like you and turn everything around where you are the person who's in control. You're the person that's in control. And again, this is not something that you need to spend a lot of time on. This is just like you'd see in martial arts. So economy of motion, conservation of energy, your distance, footwork, so on. But it works against people who have the power, but psychologically, you're able to turn that around in your favor, just like you do in judo or aikido. You use their energy against them, you may redirect it, and so forth, or even prevent them from doing something. And again, this is to make your life better. But for most people, they are in a situation where they're very aggressive in sports or the dojo, so on. But in these other social aspects, they don't understand. It's because they haven't been taught. what are the limits that I can do? Is this acceptable? What will they do? What is the outcome? Well, we tell you through the model exactly what you're going to get. And what are examples of people have taken it? I still get, we had another class just finished recently, mortgage bankers, litigation lawyers, actors. We have people who've been in the military, guys who work at famous tech companies for, companies you would know going into space. And they'll say, wow, this has changed already the way I view everything, what I consider doable, how I'm closing deals on the sales side. I didn't know that I can say this is no or unacceptable or take control. So it's a whole different paradigm. That's why I call it not even a paradigm shift, but paradigm shattering. And then you're given the tools to understand, again, how people are thinking, and then stopping most of the problems before they even happen, and even finding opportunities where you thought there was none, right? So in fact, many times a problem you see is a far better and greater opportunity when someone said no, when they've had no engagement to begin with.
Well, that sounds really intriguing, and certainly would be a benefit to anybody who's interested in martial arts or success or trying to transcend this crazy world and where it seems like so much is stacked up against us. So I really want to commend everyone to check out the Psych Combat course. Where can people learn more about your work?
Yeah, so if you go to impacteq, the letter EQ.com, so you can look, each one of the courses are segmented by stacks. So everything is based on the PsycheOS and Programmable Psyche, but then they're packaged. So you've got the Psyche Stack, which has the Psych Combat, or you can also click on the schedules on the main page, and it will show you all the new classes and courses that are coming out as well over the next couple months and so forth.
Outstanding. Well, I certainly recommend everybody check that out, and I want to thank you, James Santagata, for joining us on Everyday Samurai. We'll look forward to talking to you again.
Great. Thanks, Ken.
Friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai and look forward to seeing you next time.